But on a Bitcoin standard, it doesn't matter where you come from, or any country, any currency. If you have a Bitcoin, you can transact because the local commercial people take Bitcoin, and it's an instantaneous transaction, and there's nobody who's going to stop them. The center of freedom has moved from the U.S. to El Salvador. So this is what I'm telling people: leave the U.S. because it's sucking hind tit. The U.S. is now at the back of the queue. They're no longer the shining city on the hill. It's a fucking zoned out, fentanyl addicted, homeless person.
Today, we're diving into the realm of Bitcoin maximalist Max Keiser, an experienced expert who passionately believes in the revolutionary potential of Bitcoin. Keiser has made an excellent argument for the transformative benefits that have resulted from El Salvador's bold decision to include Bitcoin into its domestic economy. Under this strategic initiative, the country has amassed nearly $1 billion in Bitcoin as part of its national reserves. Through this revolutionary move, El Salvador hopes to break free from the constraints and volatility of existing fiat currencies and boost its economic growth. El Salvador strengthens its financial stability and draws in international investment by increasing its Bitcoin holdings. Keiser stresses that this strategy is an essential part of a larger financial structure that centers around Bitcoin. He sees El Salvador being the first nation in the world to have a complete Bitcoin reserve, which would be a revolutionary move and make it one of the richest countries in the world. Remember to subscribe to our channel and like this video if you want to see more amazing videos. Let's hear Keiser's exploration of the future of money.
El Salvador is solving a big problem for America on the southern border. Their southern border is out of control. And they look at El Salvador and they notice that less and less Salvadorans are making the trip north. So they're actually loving President Bukele because he's helping them with a big problem that they have at the southern border. And they are now rooting for other countries to do the same, to follow in the Bukele model, and this would stem the number of migrants who are crossing the southern border. Number two, to your point, it is a struggle. We are dealing with the IMF. So the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, is, John Perkins wrote about this in his Confessions of an Economic Hitman, which he worked for the bankers and the IMF. And when a Southern American country or Central American country did something that the bankers on Wall Street didn't like, they would send in the economic hitman, and they would, in fact, throw him out of an airplane, the leader of that country, et cetera. And the history is replete with examples of this. It's not debated. This is exactly what they do and have been done. Today, we've got the IMF fulfilling that role. It's trying to get as many countries in the world to get on the U.S. dollar. Donald Trump said last week that he's going to go after countries that stop using the dollar. And so they're very nervous. They're very nervous about the fact that the dollar is losing world reserve currency. There's nothing they can do about it. But, with the IMF, President Bukele has pretty much gone toe-to-toe, let's say, with the IMF. And he's in the process now of exiting the IMF. So the economy is growing sufficiently without the IMF's help. Thank you very much. The balance sheet of the country, by the way, the balance sheet of El Salvador, the country has hundreds of millions of dollars, close to $1 billion in Bitcoin. They're putting Bitcoin on their reserves, which helps them grow outside of all this fiat money madness. So not only do they use it as day-to-day legal tender, but the country itself has put Bitcoin on their balance sheet. We have an adopting El Salvador passport program. People are sending us $1 million in donation to get a El Salvadoran passport within 2 weeks, and then that money goes into Bitcoin. We've got some other financial architecting that's going on, which is favoring Bitcoin. So that not only is the country have Bitcoin as legal tender, but it'll become a fully reserved Bitcoin country, which means that it'll be potentially the richest country in the world because all these other countries are going to die into fiat money madness. They're all throwing this. Let me tell you, El Salvador is the next Singapore. And the GDP here is going to triple in the next 5, 6, 7 years. This is the place to be, Jimmy. The U.S. is a fucking shithole. I mean, if you want to waste your time in that godforsaken hellhole, have at it. But if you want to be part of the revolution where people are optimistic and building the future and there's economic freedom and freedom of speech, there's only one country in the world, and that's El Salvador. Get on a plane, come on down here. We'll set you up with a podcast. We got a beautiful studio. Taste freedom. I will baptize you in the Pacific Ocean. and turn you into a Bitcoin maximalism. I have that role here. I'm the high priest of Bitcoin in El Salvador, and I will baptize you in the waters of the Pacific and Bitcoin Beach, and you will start, you and Steph, a future of optimism, and leave that godforsaken, fentanyl rattled, idle shithole behind, Jimmy.
Max Keiser explores the turbulent and contentious relationship that exists between the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and El Salvador. Based on John Perkins's Confessions of an Economic Hitman, Keiser shows how the IMF has traditionally used coercive measures to influence economies in order to preserve power. That being said, El Salvador's government is demonstrating audacity by rejecting support from the IMF and seeking self-sufficient economic development. This approach includes integrating Bitcoin into the nation's financial system as a crucial component. Keiser envisions a bright future for El Salvador, drawing comparisons between its potential and Singapore's explosive economic growth. He encourages everyone to join this revolution of financial freedom and innovation. Keeping that in mind, don't forget to like, subscribe for more videos. Now let's watch some more clips of Max Keiser discussing his optimistic views on El Salvador and Bitcoin.
I think in America, when you see outcry about money being sent to Ukraine, for example, well, the government prints the money. I mean, and no one's going to stop them. They can print it and ship it to Ukraine. Now, what we're seeing now is that, of course, all that money ends up causing inflation, and then the inflation is bankrupting the middle class, and people are outraged, and they say, stop sending money to Ukraine. But to get more to the point, they should be protesting about getting rid of fiat money and adopting Bitcoin, as we do in El Salvador, and you too can enjoy the Salvadoran miracle. It's a circular Bitcoin economy. It's all in Bitcoin. I mean, you can just use Bitcoin your entire life in El Salvador if you want. The adoption rate is increasing every month, every year, and but if you can do it now. So in Bitcoin Beach, my friend Mike Peterson of Bitcoin Beach, he started the Bitcoin revolution in El Zonte, El Salvador, and the circular economy in El Zonte by giving all the pupusa sellers and everybody in town some free Bitcoin. And they said, just transact in Bitcoin, because the surfers that were arriving in El Zonte, they had different currencies from different countries, and there was no way for the local business people to accept that foreign money. And they don't take credit cards, and they're unbanked. So these guys would have to go 20 miles down the road to an ATM and try to get cash, and it was very cumbersome. But on a Bitcoin standard, it doesn't matter where you come from, or any country, any currency. If you have a Bitcoin, you can transact because the local commercial people take Bitcoin, and it's an instantaneous transaction, and there's nobody who's going to stop them. The center of freedom has moved from the U.S. to El Salvador. So this is what I'm telling people: leave the U.S. because it's sucking hind tit. The U.S. is now at the back of the queue. They're no longer the shining city on the hill. It's a fucking zoned out, fentanyl addicted, homeless person, on the parking lot dying from, whatever. That's like the U.S. is now the place to leave. It's a shithole. It's the banana republic. When the President Bukele gave his recent speech to CPAC, he was talking about inflation in the U.S. and how America is now monetizing their own debt. America prints money to buy its own debt because nobody else in the world wants to buy American debt. It's called debt monetization. And back 50 years ago, people in the U.S. would look at Central America and say, ha ha, you have to buy your own debt. You're a banana republic. And so here you have the president of El Salvador lecturing people in Washington at CPAC about the fact that you guys are now monetizing your own debt. I suggested to the president, as the Bitcoin advisor to the president, that he should include a line in CPAC that said, "Who's the banana republic now, bitch?" But he opted not to use that phraseology, sadly. I think it would have gone viral. But like everything I've suggested to the president so far in my 2 years here, he has pretty much rejected every one of my suggestions. But nevertheless, I keep trying. He hates corruption, and he's told the attorney general to investigate every minister in the country for any corruption or wrongdoing, and if he finds any, put him in jail, because it's a drag on the economy, and it's not good for the country. And the people that gave him an 87% vote in the last election, just a few months ago, this is what they demand. President Bukele serves the people. The people want no more corruption. So he's going to get rid of anybody who is corrupt. He got rid of the gangsters. Well, all he does is all day long. I've had the pleasure of spending some time with him and talking to him a little bit. And, he is a guy who all he does 24 hours a day is think about how to improve the country. And he looks at every single detail. I was at a dinner not too long ago, and he was talking about the restrooms at the airport needed to be cleaner. And I'm like, what? 10 minutes before that, he was talking about a $1 billion bond offering. And then he segues right into the details of what people experience at the airport. And this is the mind of like a Steve Jobs meets JFK, right? He's a JFK. He's about energizing people to do something for their country. And at the same time, he's like Steve Jobs, where he can keep 10,000 details in his head and just execute as an executive so many brilliant things, like just changing the tourist visa from 90 days to 180 days. So now tourists, suddenly all that tourist money is here for twice as long. That's an easy fix. He did it in a day. He had the idea, he changed it, the next day it was changed. So he's just like rapid fire going through this enormous list of tasks to do, and he's getting things done. Infrastructure, roads, everything is done. He's getting it all done.
Max Keiser offers an insightful analysis of the present financial situation with a focus on El Salvador and the United States. He starts out by talking about how Americans generally feel about government expenditure, especially when it comes to funding nations like Ukraine. Keiser draws attention to how this approach fuels inflation, which eventually has a detrimental impact on the middle class. He said people should support embracing Bitcoin and rejecting fiat money, as El Salvador has done, rather than arguing against such spending. The financial situation of El Salvador is then clearly described by Keiser, who refers to it as a circular Bitcoin economy in which transactions are conducted mostly using Bitcoin. He attributes this change to the Bitcoin revolution that his friend Mike Peterson. Keiser highlights how easy and accessible Bitcoin transactions are, regardless of the user's location or currency. In addition, he draws comparisons between El Salvador's and the US's economies, contending that El Salvador now stands at the center of financial freedom. According to Keiser, the US is currently dealing with problems like debt monetization, which were formerly connected to countries called banana republics. He points out that President Bukel of El Salvador is constantly fighting corruption and putting out great effort to advance the nation's government and infrastructure. In the end, Keiser highlights the revolutionary changes taking place in El Salvador under President Bukel's direction and invites viewers to think about the advantages of embracing Bitcoin. But that's not all. Watch our other videos for daily Bitcoin updates. Until next time, happy investing.